Hey Matt, thank you and for joining the podcast. As I already said when we just met, I absolutely love your book, The Activator Advantage. So really looking forward to interviewing you about it.
Well,
I,
thank you for having me, Dirk. I appreciate the
yeah, nee,
invitation.
I was delighted that you could join. Let me start straight away. Which of these three words is your favorite and why? Sales, acquisition, business development.
Well, as I say to people oftentimes, I'm not a salesperson, but I do write about sales and I do research sales. So I'm more of a sales anthropologist, I guess. And I think sales has been the word that I've used the most in my career. I don't like acquisition just because sales as well is partly about retention and expansion, right? So
Yeah.
acquisition to me feels like it only tells part of the story. Sales, I think, is a good word, but the problem is, as you and I both know, in professional services, and we tell the story right in the beginning of the new book, Dirk, that some people really don't like that term in professional services. So I would say sales, but probably the non-confrontational word or is probably business development, because I think everyone can agree to that. Even salespeople, B2B salespeople who are selling software or manufactured products, they could probably also relate to business development. And certainly lawyers and consultants, business development is not offensive to them in the same way that sales is. So
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah, that's lovely. Hey, I'm an independent management consultant and an executive coach, and you would typically typify me as a doer seller. Now, I absolutely love the content of my work. It's the best job in the world. But I do not particularly like the selling element.
yeah,
I
you're
am
not
what you
alone.
I'm probably not alone. I am what you so aptly describe someone who knows that eating radishes is good, but does not necessarily
Yeah.
experience it as enjoyable. Am I unique, or is that a habit that many doer sellers possess? And if so, what are the reasons for that?
Yeah, no, you're not unique at all there, Dirk. I mean, you probably are unique in other ways, but not in
Yeah,
that way.
but not in
So,
this one.
not in this way. So, this way, I think it's quite common across doer sellers and professionals. So, if we're not just consultants, but again, lawyers, accountants, investment bankers, executive search professionals, architects, engineers, public relations experts, people who sell advice for a living generally speaking, have an aversion to sales and even just business development in general. As we say in the book, your typical lawyer did not go to law school to become a salesperson. If they wanted to be a salesperson, they would have become a salesperson. Instead, they went to law school. But I think, as we'll talk about here, and by the way, before I get into that, Dirk, I would say how do we know this, that they have this aversion to sales? Well, when we study professionals and we collected data, as we'll talk about amongst, from across 3,000 professionals around the world, and we found that most of them, they did business development when they get around to it, meaning that as partners in their firm or like yourself, somebody who owns a business and is responsible not just for delivering the work, but for growing the business, we know we have to do it. We know we have to do business development, but for most of us, we do it reluctantly. We'll do it when we lose a big client or when we lose a big pitch, or maybe when the business is slow and we're feeling pressure to grow and to get out there and hustle for business. But by and large, most professionals will avoid doing it unless they really have to. So again, 80% of professionals we found will do whatever they can to not do business development. And it was a small minority, these activators that we're going to talk about, who really do find the time and they have kind of a cadence and a routine and a commitment to doing it. But I think it's very important that even for those professionals, they don't feel it's not sales is not the kind of thing that they enjoy doing either. But I think they've woven it into their workflow where it doesn't really feel like sales. It feels actually like helping clients, but maybe in a different way. And so we'll talk more about that as we get into the discussion.
Yeah. Um, but one of the things that I really really intrigued me is you, and you already said it in the beginning of the podcast. You contributed a lot to thought leadership in the area of selling and sales. Everyone knows you, for instance, as one of the co-authors of the Challenger Sale.
Yep.
There was a groundbreaking book in this area.
Thank you.
Um, which specific event or observation inspired you to write the Activator Advantage?
Yeah, so I mentioned this before, but there's a story in the beginning of that book. It was actually an experience where I was presenting the Challenger sale research, but I was invited to present to partners from a large consulting firm. And I got about 45 minutes into my planned 60-minute keynote, and the managing partner stood up in the front row and started waving his hands. He said, "Can you please stop talking?" And it was a very unnerving situation. This has never happened to me before. And he waved for one of the junior people to bring him a hand mic. So everyone's waiting awkwardly while he's waiting for a microphone so he can be heard. He takes the microphone, flips it on, and he says, Professor Dixon, you've been talking about sales and selling and sales effectiveness and sales productivity, and it's fascinating research. I'm sure our clients would be quite interested in this, but maybe nobody told you this before you came here, but we are not salespeople. There's not a single salesperson in this ballroom. And there were about 500 partners in the ballroom listening to him as he was saying this. And he said, in fact, I would argue that our firm doesn't sell anything to clients. And I took a beat. I was trying to think about what time is my flight home and is it possible to get on an earlier flight home? But what I said was, can we stipulate to the fact that there's a mysterious process by which the client's money ends up in your firm's bank account? Can we just call it sales for now? And he laughed, fortunately, and everyone else laughed too. And so I finished my presentation, but I did make a couple of mental notes, Dirk. The first one was, to turn down every invitation to present to Doer-Sellers because the research I had from Challenger and some of the other research we'd done was about salespeople. It was not about Doer-Sellers,
Yeah.
but who, by and large, as we just talked about, don't really see themselves as salespeople, nor do they really like selling. And so the research was academically interesting, but it wasn't really relevant to them. And then the second note I made was that this would be an interesting area to explore with research and data if we ever get the chance. And so it was many years later, in 2022, we kicked off a large global study. We collected data on 3,000 partner level professionals across law, consulting, accounting, investment banking, executive search, and public relations, and did a large study, which then ended up turning into that book that you just held up, the Activator Advantage.
Yeah, because in that book you identify five types
Yeah,
of partners in the professional services landscape:
yeah,
experts, confidence, debaters, realists, and activators.
yeah,
One of my favorite pictures in the book is also a kind of a pictogram which you basically created, which depicts all the
yeah.
different types. It's one of my absolute favorite passages in the book. Could you perhaps briefly explain the
Sure.
characteristics of these different types in the worlds of professional services, and why is it that the activator is the only one that drives consistent growth?
Yeah, great question. So, this is now this is important for listeners, I think, to remember. Is this is we did not create these profiles; they were created out of the data. So, in other words, the data and the analysis pointed to the fact that across 3,000 partners, every single one of them fell into one of these five profiles. Now, to be clear, this doesn't mean you don't have elements of all five approaches. Every partner we saw had an element of every one of those approaches. So we have all five within us, but it also was true that every partner spiked in one. So we kind of have one primary posture, and then we may have some secondary or tertiary postures. Then the other thing I think is important to remember is that these are not about personality. I think it might sound like it's a personality-based study, but we looked at what partners do when it came to the selling part of the doer-seller job. What do they do with their business development time? How do they pitch for business? How do they target clients? How do they negotiate fees, et cetera? And so we're looking at the selling part of their job. We're looking at what they do, their behaviors. We're looking at who they are as people, if that makes sense. So the five are the ones that you articulated. The first one is the expert. The expert is the reluctant business developer. In many professionals are reluctant about sales, but these folks don't actually believe that they should have to sell. They believe that they are so well known in the market that their credentials and their expertise should speak for itself. In that if a client has a need that aligns with their expertise, that client will find me, they will call me, they will send me an email, and they will ask for a meeting. Now, one CEO we interviewed, Dirk, said he felt like most of his partners were in this expert profile. And he said their sales approach is to aggressively wait for the phone to ring, which, as you could tell, he was not a big fan of that approach.
No,
Now,
but I think it's a pretty recognizable
pretty
recognizable
recognizable.
type.
Yeah.
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 I
Now,
could sympathize. Yeah.
it's interesting, though. I think in the big firms around the world, there are always some partners who fall into that profile. And I think deservedly so, because they're the world's leading expert in a specific domain area. The problem is then there are dozens of other partners who think
Yeah.
that they are that person who really aren't that person, you know. So now, because of their kind of reactive way in which they sell, these folks get pulled into a lot of tender and RFP driven purchasing, because
Hmm.
by the time the client finds them, the client today is also talking to other firms and other
Yeah.
experts who have similar expertise. So the second one is the confidant. The confidant is kind of an old school trusted advisor. And this is not to denigrate or criticize the concept of being a trusted advisor, because I think many in the industry think of this as a gold standard. But it's the way that they execute this playbook. So what these folks do is they build a small portfolio of deep client relationships. Think like, two, three, four key clients. As one managing partner told me, it's almost as if these people are trying to set up their personal set of ATM machines. And then they just stand by those machines for the whole of their career and collect money from them. Now, what earns them the right to be able to do that? Well, one, they deliver great work to their clients, so they deliver superior work product. Two, they deliver a very responsive client service. When the client experiences any kind of friction or anything like that, the confidant really acts as an advocate for the client within the firm, right? So if the client is upset about an invoice or a rate card, they'll lobby with their superiors to get a discount for that client, because it's important for my client to have that. And then third, they try to build not just business relationships with clients, but ideally personal relationships as well. They speak wistfully about the fact that they go on holiday together with their client's family, or that they were invited to their client's son or daughter's wedding, or the fact that they went to law school with the client or business school, these kinds of things. And so what the confidant believes is that if I deliver great work, I am very responsive to my client. I take care of all the issues that are frustrating them. And if I have a personal relationship with them, what I've basically done is I built a moat or a wall around those clients, and I've made it impossible for anybody else to steal that client. Because in the confidant's mind, their view is, if I've done all of these things, Dirk, if you are my client, it would be unimaginable that you would go to a competitor. Even if it's not work that I am well suited to deliver, you will always come to me first, and you
Yeah.
will at least
So
ask the
kind of right
question.
of first refusal.
Right of
Yeah.
first refusal.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah. Now, I think some of those things sound quite good, actually, but I think there's a dark side to the confidant as well, which is they have very sharp elbows inside the firm. So, because they have a very small set of key client relationships, they don't like sharing them, because they
No.
live in fear of bad things that might happen if I bring a colleague into my client account. And this, of course, drives firm leaders crazy, because firm leaders are trying to tell their partners, get out there, collaborate, bring all of our capabilities to the client. Don't just sell your own
Yeah.
expertise.
Yeah.
So the third one, we'll get to the activator last, maybe, since we already know from the title of the book that they win. So hopefully the listeners are surprised when we get to the end here. So we've got the debater. Now, the debater is a sharp-elbowed, opinionated know-it-all. Their way of developing business is to tell clients they're thinking about it wrong. You're doing this wrong. They want to reframe. They want to be provocative. And I think it's interesting to me, because that profile stylistically is actually quite similar to the challenger profile
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
business to business sales. Now, that was the winning profile in our B2B sales study that we wrote about in the challenger sale work, but they don't do very well in professional services. And what that taught me as a researcher or as a sales anthropologist was, it's okay to be a debater, to be a challenger if you are selling a product. But if you are the product, as we are in professional services, that is a
Yeah.
very tough posture to take. It doesn't mean you shouldn't tell your client when they're heading down the wrong path. But clients also say, yes, I want you to, help me think outside the box and tell me when I'm getting it wrong. But if I sit down with you every time you tell me I'm doing it wrong, that's exhausting.
Yeah, no,
Because
I just wanted to tell you about the cover of the
yeah,
book,
yeah,
but
yeah.
basically this red thing, definitely no, no.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. Okay, then we have the realist. So the realist is sort of the glass half empty professional. They are very focused on telling clients that things will take twice as long, that they will cost twice as much, and that the impact will be half as great as they're expecting. And that sounds maybe like a strange way to sell, but the reason that realists do this is they tell us in interviews that they know every client out there has been burned in the past by the consultant who overpromised and underdelivered, or the lawyer who sent the surprise invoice after the legal matter was concluded. And we've all had these experiences, and so realists try to do the exact opposite. They want to be the truth tellers to the client. Now, clients also say, I appreciate the honesty, but can we also talk about what could be accomplished together if things went our way, if we really leaned into this initiative versus all the things that could go wrong? And that brings us to the last one, which is the activator. So the activator is a super connector. They're very active on LinkedIn. It's not so much that they're influencers on LinkedIn. I think sometimes people get the wrong impression. They do post points of view and white papers and things like that, but they're really using LinkedIn as if it's the world's biggest business conference. They're making connections, they're commenting, they're liking, they're sharing, they're reposting. And actually, they would say their goal is to get the conversation off of LinkedIn. So I want to start there perhaps, but then I want to go to email and then to a Zoom meeting and then to a coffee or a lunch or a dinner and then something even better, a paid client relationship. Now, these people are also very active at live events. So when you go to a conference, what is typical is that partners from consulting firms and other professional services firms, they tend to stand in the corner together with their colleagues and they wait for clients to approach them. That is not what an activator does. An activator is out there, they're working the room, they know who's coming to the event. They are really strategic around the use of their time. They've scheduled the coffees and the lunches and the dinners. And somebody asked me, Dirk, the other day, why didn't you call these people connectors? Because it seems like that's what they're doing. Why did you choose the name activator? And the reason we didn't choose connector is that we don't think these people are all about collecting stacks of business cards or LinkedIn connections. What they're trying to do is turn those connections into paying client relationships. They're trying to activate those connections. And the way that they do it is fascinating. What they focus on doing is proactively, not for money, but for free, bring new ideas to clients, new ways to make money, to save money, to manage risk, to capture market share, to drive growth. Whatever the objective is that we help our clients with, they're trying to bring ideas to clients before clients realize there is a need or a risk, and they reach out to them. So now there's a couple of reasons they do this. One, they want to establish a posture of goodwill towards the client. And of course, they are well aware of the principle of reciprocity, that when we do something positive for somebody, they tend to reciprocate back to us, right? So if I give you some free advice and free counsel, then you are more likely to hire me for paid work. Second, they want to have an opportunity to shape the client's understanding of an opportunity. So even if you decide that you are going to go talk to my competitors and you're going to, this is going to be a competitive pursuit, you're going to put a tender or an RFP together, I have shaped your understanding of the idea because I reached out to you first. I shaped it, and ideally, I shaped it in a way that benefits me and my firm when it comes to the competition for the business. And then the last thing I'll say about the activators, unlike the confidant who keeps colleagues out of the relationship, activators bring colleagues in. And the reason they do that, when we talk to them, and we'll talk a little bit about this as well, these kind of interesting changes in client behavior we've seen in recent years. But activators all say, look, I know clients today are just less loyal than they used to be. The client you have today that is a loyal client tomorrow might be somebody else's client. And so you really need to do everything you can to shift the client's loyalty from loyalty to me to loyalty to the we of the firm. Because if I can bring in my colleagues and I can establish multiple points of connection into the client organization, that creates a much stickier and resilient client relationship. It's the kind of relationship where a client thinks twice before they go to a competitor, because it's a lot of work for the client to now educate a new firm across all of these initiatives and projects and priorities.
Yeah.
So those are the five. I'll take a breath, maybe grab a
No,
quick
no,
drink,
no,
but we
but
could.
I so appreciate that you that you do this, because I realize it sounds like a long, let's say, story, but I think
Yeah.
it's so crucial to the book, and I think for me it personally also had a couple of eye openers, because I always felt, let's say, relatively relaxed in, for instance, an expert role.
Mhm.
Uh, and your book really opened, because people who are looking for me have also looked for, let's say, competitors of
Sure.
mine, basically.
Yeah.
And I think these are all, let's say, I think incredible, helpful things that you gave. And I think also what you said about confidence is in the sense of, their clients,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
also, yeah, you create, if you do that in a kind of a firm context,
Mhm.
you create, let's say, a whole series of small kingdoms or
Yeah.
fiefdoms,
That's
and
right. Yeah.
without any synergies, etc. So
Yeah.
and I think that makes an awful lot of sense. Hey, the activators, the three C's of the
Yeah.
activator. Can you say some words about it? Because that is also a concept that I really loved in the book.
Yeah. So before I talk about that, what I might say is, when we look at, so these are the five profiles. Obviously, the listeners know that the activator is the best performing of the five, but just to let people know how we measured that, because I find consultants are skeptical and they want to know that where the
Yeah,
data
yeah,
comes from.
correct. Yeah,
So yeah, so there were 3,000 partners. They worked for across 40, it was 41 different firms that participated in the research. We asked the leadership of those firms to evaluate each partner individually, and we used a standard set of business development effectiveness questions. So sometimes people hear the story and I think they feel like, well, this is a story about client acquisition, but not so much client retention. But actually, the battery of questions we use were things like, how effective is Dirk overall at business development, at landing new clients, at retaining client business, at expanding client relationships. And so we're really trying to get a very holistic understanding of these partners. So now, when we look at performance, what we actually find is that on the one hand, you can be a top business developer in any of the five profiles. So we find top rainmakers or top business developers in each of the five, but your probability of being a high performer is not the same across the board. The highest probability is activator. And in fact, when we ran a predictive analysis, what we found is that if you went from not very good at being an activator to very good, you could grow your own book of business by up to 32%, which is a very big number. Now, I always caution partners and say, look, if you don't see yourself in that profile, maybe you say, I'm more of an expert, I'm more of a debater, or confidant, or realist, don't psych yourself out. So the goal is not to go from zero to activator and drive that 32% growth. The goal is to maybe move a little bit, right?
yeah,
You and I talked about before we started these atomic, the idea of atomic habits, like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
the James Clear concept. But how do we start with small habits and build on those, and maybe look at what has worked for us historically as partners, and how do we bring in a little bit more of what activators are doing so we can move incrementally, not this huge change? Because I find sometimes people think about that growth or that number and it's very daunting. It's a very big thing. But back to your question, so yes, there are three things that activators are doing. There's a lot that activators are doing. The book is about all the things: the workflows, the habits, the mindsets, the key moments where it really matters to be an activator in the client relationship. But at the highest level, you're right. There are three C's to being an activator: committing to business development, connecting broadly and deeply, and creating value proactively. So committing to business development is kind of obvious, but what this means is not behaving like the other 80% of partners who do business development when they get around to it, but instead having a rhythmic cadence and routine to our business development. Why is that important? Well, in a world where clients are less loyal, you need to have a backup plan. Because again, you can't become overly reliant on a small set of clients. You need to continue to find opportunities to broaden, deepen those relationships and build new relationships. So you need a pipeline of opportunities behind your current paying clients. Connecting broadly and deeply. So we talked about how activators are building a network. Many activators would say, Dirk, that they see their network actually as their most important strategic asset as professionals. Because yes, if I'm in a big firm, I will get leads from marketing. People will fill out forms on the website. Some people will reach out to me on LinkedIn. But most of my business comes from my network. And so I've got to harvest that network like I'm a farmer and I'm harvesting crops, right? It is all coming from that network. They also connect deeply internally. We talked about how activators are always looking for that opportunity to bring in others within the client, or sorry, within the organization, bring them to their clients. Activators will talk about how yes, I have my own personal expertise, but one of the things my clients really value about me is that I'm a general contractor for expertise. So I'm very good at finding the other people within my firm and even other people in my network that I can bring to my client and make that introduction. And my clients always love getting those introductions, and then they thank me for making the introduction. So I didn't have to do any work other than make the introduction, and now I've deepened my client relationship. And then the last piece, this creating value proactively. So activators are all about bringing ideas to clients before clients A, reach out, but B, even realize that there is a threat or an opportunity. So I want to help you look around corners. And this is so important for partners. You know, one of the things I find that a lot of partners, um, they get nervous about this idea of reaching out to clients between paid engagements because they feel like my clients will find that um, sort of obtrusive and it feels like selling, right? The client will see through it. They won't welcome me. They don't like that kind of outreach. They want me to wait for the phone to ring and they will call me when they need help. But activators know that clients actually really value those insights that they bring between paid engagements because clients, when we did our own client research, we found the number one complaint that clients had about partners and professionals is I don't hear from them often enough. They disappear between the paid work. And what they don't understand is that I, as an executive, I'm so heads down on my own business, my own strategy, my own priorities. You're going to talk to more people in a week that just like me that I'm going to talk to all year. And so I really rely upon you to help me scan the market, to look at the broader business landscape, to bring ideas to me, help me look around corners, help me avoid pitfalls and landmines and things like that, and just bring those ideas to me. I will always make time for that. So again, activators are very forthcoming and proactive. One of my favorite quotes in the book, Dirk, yeah, because sometimes I think consultants get a little bit nervous about this idea of doing free work. And I think rightfully so, right? Because we've got a lot on our plates and there are lots of clients who will put us in the friend zone and they would just take free work over, for a long time. And so we've got to be very judicious around where we do this free work and for whom we do this free work and look for that reciprocity. And we could talk more about that. But one activator told us, my paid work, that pays my bonus this year, but it's all the free work I'm doing that pays my bonus next year and the year after that and
Yeah.
the year after that, right? It's this pay it forward kind of approach that activators take. So at the highest level, those are the pillars of
Yeah.
being an activator.
Yeah. Nee, and one of the elements I really liked in how you described the story is also um, the dead moments between engagement is, and I think that was a real eye opener. You said, look, it should not be a kind of hollow kind of, check in the
No,
sense of
yeah, yeah,
what's going on with you, because then clients will see this sale, but you need to see that there's an opportunity to actively
yeah,
bring something. Yeah, that
yeah.
was a very powerful concept. Yeah.
I would say, Dirk, clients hate that. They hate the empty check-in, the
Yeah,
valueless check-in.
exactly.
You always have to bring a gift to your, so I've got to
Absolutely.
bring a
Yeah.
present to my client, which is I know something that you need to know. Now, if you're going to just do hey, we haven't talked in a while, let's check in. You might as well send an email to your client saying, hey, do you have any budget that you can spend with me? Because
Yeah.
they see that, they do see
Yeah,
as
yeah.
quite
I'm
salesy.
doing my
And
business planning
yeah,
for next year, and I
yeah,
was just wondering if you, yeah,
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 just be honest.
yeah,
Right.
yeah. It's very, very good guidance. Hey, one of the things you said earlier in our conversation is you said that clients, even long-standing ones, are much less loyal than before,
Mhm.
rendering traditional business development approaches less effective. What are the root causes of this shift in client behavior and
Yeah.
purchasing processes?
Yeah, I think if I were to take a step back, what I would say is that the whole industry of professional services is kind of built on an assumption. And the assumption is if you do great work for your client and deliver value, and if you have a good relationship with them, they will come back to you over and over and over again. But we found is that clients are a lot less likely to do that than they once were. We did a study of C-level decision makers, and we found that 5 years ago, three-quarters of them would say, yes, if the firm I hired did good work and I have a good relationship, I will go back to them again. Today, that number is closer to 50%. And then asking these buyers what that's going to look like 5 years from now, only 37% of them were willing to raise their hand and say they will go back to the incumbent firm, the firm that we currently use. Now, there's a lot of drivers for that. I think one, I would say in most areas, procurement is much more involved now in evaluating and vetting professional services spend than they once were. Professional services used to be this kind of black box, right, where senior executives could just put their thumb on the scale for the consultant they really preferred or the law firm they really like. And today it's much more transparent, right? It's much more there's a lot more scrutiny. It's much more rigorous in terms of purchasing. Now, we've seen in a number of areas the rise of alternative service providers, boutique and niche firms. So these are firms that 10 years ago, we're really only taking the low end transactional work, the stuff that we didn't want to do. Well, suddenly a lot of these firms are showing up competing for some of the bigger projects, right? The more expensive work that used to be the provenance of just the big prestigious firms. And that's no longer the case. And one of the other big trends I see, and I hear this from clients love AI. And the reason they love AI is twofold. Two reasons. One, they think that AI will put downward pressure on rates that they pay to firms today. So if you're not paying a junior associate out of business school to do this kind of work or an analyst, you can have a machine do it. That should translate to lower fees for me
Yeah.
as a client. But
Yeah.
the real reason that clients like it is it makes it much easier to shop around for the best provider for a specific need. So think back in the day, part of the reason that clients went back to the same firms over and over again is it's a lot of work to go do the research to find another firm that might actually be a little bit better than your current firm at a specific area. Today, you just ask ChatGPT, here is the thing we're trying to do. Who are the best firms out there for this? And you will get an entire list, including a lot of firms you've never heard of before and a lot of independent consultants. You could even then go ask ChatGPT, hey, this is what's important to us. How much is this going to cost us? What's the range of fees we might pay?
Indicative, yeah, yeah,
Indicative fees. Can you
yeah,
help me write an RFP or a tender for this? So clients love it because it allows them to compete the entire universe of
yeah,
providers. And I think this view that you hear from clients today that the most important thing for them is to hear what as many providers have to say as possible about their issues and their opportunities. And your clients will say, look, you're doing yourself a disservice if you just assume that the firm you use today is the best firm to use tomorrow. Every single time you want to hire a firm, you've got to say, here's my issue. What do you think? And you've got to ask a broad set of players.
yeah. Um, because also your book divides client stakeholders in three categories:
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
blockers, talkers, and mobilizers. How can doer sellers recognize these categories, and how should they deal with each of them?
Yeah, great question. So one of the things, we talked about before, connecting broadly and deeply. And so there's another dimension on this, which you've brought up now, which is how do I connect within the client organization? So what you find is with most consultants, with most professionals, they really focus on the senior level decision maker. So that's the C-level executive, the person who has the budget, who signs the check, signs the agreement, this kind of thing. And I'm not saying we should not focus on that executive. We absolutely should. But what activators understand is that increasingly in today's environment, that might be the person signing the agreement and paying for the engagement, but they're not really the person making the decision. It's usually a buying committee. It's a whole group. They may be on the buying committee, but there's now going to be a whole group of other stakeholders that you've got to navigate. We wrote a book called The Challenger Customer. It actually came out in 2015. It was a sequel to The Challenger Sale. And when we wrote that book back in 2015, we found that the size of the average business to business buying committee was about 5.5 stakeholders. Now, when I tell people that today, they laugh at me and they say, I've got 5.5 committees that each have 5.5 people on them, so it's really grown. In fact, my former colleagues now at Gartner Group, who acquired our old company, they're continuing to study this with data. And they found that even for small purchases, small engagements, the average buying committee is up in the teens, in some cases, well over 20 stakeholders. Now, how do activators manage that dynamic? Well, what they're really looking for is their mobilizer. What is a mobilizer? A mobilizer is the person, it may not be the senior decision maker, it may be somebody else, but they have the skill, the will, the gravitas, the influence to get a big buying committee to move forward and agree on something more than let's kick the can down the road and not do anything right now, which buying committees are very good at. There's this joke that consultants use a lot, which is everybody on the committee can say no and nobody can say yes. And so buying committees, it's not surprising that when we as consultants, we make a pitch to a client and we have a client who loves what we're talking about. And they say, Dirk, that would really transform our business. This is great. I'm going to take it to my colleagues and I'll get back to you. And so often what we hear is, yeah, I couldn't really get the rest of the team on board. They just felt like there's too much going on. It's not the right time. Let's keep up the dialogue and maybe we'll do something next year.
Yeah. The dreaded, yeah.
So your mobilizer is the person who will attach to your idea, and they're really motivated by what's best for the company, not what's best for them personally.
No.
What is best for the organization? What's best for our customers? What's best for our shareholders? And if you put forward a compelling idea, they will lean forward into the debate with the buying committee, and they will say, guys, we've got to do this for the good of the business, for the good of our customers, for our shareholders, our stakeholders, et cetera. Now, these talkers, the other type, talkers are fine, but that's really all they're good for. They are good for getting information, but when the debate starts happening in the buying committee, these people lean back. They don't lean into the debate.
Yeah.
And then the blocker is kind of obvious. Now, you're always going to have a blocker.
Yeah.
They are typically the status quo defenders.
Yeah.
So these are the people who are always like, now is not the right time. Let's stay the course. Let's talk next year.
Yeah.
And you've got, as a consultant, you've got to understand who are these people, because even if they haven't surfaced, there probably is somewhere in the client organization somebody who doesn't want to do this deal, who doesn't want to move forward with you. And you've got to find that person and neutralize them and manage them.
Yeah. You mentioned in the book also 3 elements of the activator mindset, which is self-determination, other focus, and resiliency. Could you perhaps describe each of these elements and explain their importance?
Yeah, so I think it's important for listeners to remember that these are not personality characteristics or traits. This is not who we are. Mindsets are different from personality traits because mindsets can be developed over time.
Yeah.
So let's start maybe with resiliency. I think that's one that's kind of obvious to know that the best business developers are quite resilient. They have a thick skin. Even the very best business developers in the world, they will be told no by clients more often than yes. There's no, business developer I ever met wins more than, 50, 60% of the time. So you're getting a lot of no's. And so you've got to develop a thick skin. You've got to not take it personally. You've got to protect the relationship and see it as an opportunity to not give up, but to go on to the next piece of the next pitch, the next piece of business, the next opportunity with that client. Now, again, back to the idea that mindsets can be developed. One of the best examples we know of is in the military. So you have a lot of people who join the military and not very resilient, and then they go through the training and then they leave quite resilient, right? Quite toughened up, right?
Yeah,
and this is pretty common. So these are things that we can learn.
Yeah.
Other focus we talked about before, but activators have a pride in their colleagues that you can just hear in the conversations. They love showing off their colleagues, the other people in their firm. They love putting them in front of the client because they know that the client is going to love that interaction. It's not like a confidant mindset where, oh, what might go wrong? It's, boy, I can't wait to introduce you to Dirk because he's the world's leading executive coach and leadership expert, and you're going to love the conversation. And then when the client is excited about it, they thank me for making the introduction. And now you've got a piece of business you're pursuing, and my relationship is deeper with my client. So they're very other focused. And this is also true with clients. Their posture is one of, how can I be helpful? How can I be thoughtful, with almost no expectation of getting paid for that, right? It's not free consulting, of course. They're always trying to gauge the reciprocity, and they've got to be very careful that, that client, a lot of clients love free advice and they love free work and they don't love invoices and they don't love, bills. But when you sense that here's somebody I'm delivering a lot of value, I'm bringing a lot of insight to them, I'm delivering a lot of free advice, and they keep saying they're going to hire me, but that's not happening. I've got to make the hard decision of maybe deprioritizing that client, right? And maybe focusing on a different client. And then the last thing, self-determination. So self-determination is this mindset that business development success is not up to the market. It's not up to your competitors. It's not even really up to your clients. if you do what you know needs to happen and you run your playbook and you spend the time and you connect broadly and deeply and you create value proactively, you will be successful. And so it is just a sense that activators don't blame others, right? When things don't go their way, they blame themselves if things don't go their way, and they know that success is ultimately up to them when it comes to business development.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that is a nice segue in one of the things that I highly appreciated in the book, and you already referred to it earlier. It's also the development of habits,
Yeah,
and I think it will be very worthwhile for our viewers and listeners to hear you talk about it, because I thought that was such a powerful concept in the book. Because
yeah.
the book actually advocates that doers, sellers develop different habits, and so what would be interesting if you could share that what habits or mindset do activators embed in their daily workflow, and
Yeah.
which of these might be the most challenging ones to develop for people who desire to become activators?
I'll speak about one in particular. I don't know if it's the
Yes.
most difficult, but we identify six habits, six kind of
Hmm.
routines and habits that activators practice. And I won't go through all six, but one of the ones that I find that because it's kind of the natural first place to start is just
Yeah.
carving out time to do business development. So how do we develop a rhythm, a business development rhythm? So again, most partners don't like selling. They don't like business development. They love execution. They love delivering work.
Yeah.
It's very rewarding, but they don't like the sales part of the job. And so they find any excuse not to do it. And usually what happens is the work they like to do expands to fit the time, and then they'd run out of time to do business development because they don't like doing it, right? It's like for people who don't like
I
going to the
love that
gym,
concept.
you
Yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah. I wanted to go to the gym, but basically work, the kids,
didn't have time.
family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't have time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just ran out of time. How the time goes. So,
Yeah.
so they will find any excuse not to do it. Now, I think, and this is one just to give some tactical advice, and I would turn listeners to books we mentioned Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Yeah.
There's The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. There's some really great books out there about the science of habit formation. How do we get habits to stick and to become
Yeah.
routines and true habits, right? Not just the thing that we like a New Year's resolution that we do on January 2nd, and then we don't go back to the gym again. Well, one of the things when it comes to most partners, I think, who go through our training, they immediately say, I can't do any of this stuff until I carve out and protect time on my calendar to do business development. I am guilty of avoiding it and letting the other work kind of take over and expand to fit the time. And so what they will often do is they'll leave the training and say, I'm going to put an hour on my calendar for Wednesday to do business development. And this is coming from doing no business development, and then they set up an hour on their calendar. So that's a little bit like if you say on January 1st, my New Year's resolution is to go to the gym more, and you walk into the gym on January 2nd and you run 20 miles on the treadmill, and then you try to lift the heaviest weights in the gym. That is a recipe for never going back and probably going to the hospital, right? So it's not a good outcome. So very similarly, the habit formation to experts like James Clear will say, if you want a habit to stick, it's got to start as a small, precise, actionable thing. So that means don't start by putting an hour on your calendar. Start by finding 15 minutes on your calendar and say, in this 15 minutes, here's the one thing I'm going to do, or the two things, or maybe the three things, but that's probably about it. The three people I'm going to reach out to, the two emails I'm going to send, the follow-up I'm going to do from the recent client conference. Now, the bigger problem, I think, is not just that people try to go from zero to like hours of business development time, and that's a recipe for discouragement. It's actually that they don't effectively separate what Daniel Kahneman would call system one from system two thinking. So of course we know on the one part of our brain acts as a reflexive, right? It's like when you touch a hot pan and you take your hand away because you don't want to be burned. The other system of thinking is contemplative. It's thoughtful, right? We take our time, we think through, we plan, etc. Now, when that calendar reminder pops up on Wednesday for 15 minutes and you don't have a plan, what ends up happening is a lot of partners will see the reminder pops up on their Outlook or on their calendar. They don't have a plan. They have a deer in the headlights moment, and then they go right back to the client delivery work they were working on because they don't have a plan. So what you need to do is separate the system one and system two thinking. And here's specifically how you should do it. We found that activators do all of their planning. What am I going to do on Wednesday when the 15-minute reminder comes up on my calendar? They do that Sunday night. or Monday morning before everyone shows up for work and before they start taking client calls. Then they put it in the calendar. And then when it pops up, it's just system one thinking. So it pops up and that says, Dirk, here are the three things you're going to do in these
Yeah.
15 minutes. And
Yeah.
you just
And
go
they
to work.
review their notebook and they know the three names or the two.
There they
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. And another question I had, and I think that's something that a lot of firms are wrestling with, and probably also a lot of your clients is how can you instill a kind of collective activator mindset? Because I
Yeah.
think the situation, as you and I know very well, is that a lot of professional firms are all kind of practices with walls around them, and it's more kind of collection of fiefdom
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
some shared resources and some shared risks. But hardly, let's say, environments where people actively look for synergies and involving each other. If companies contact you to kind of change that system and get more fluidity into it and really work on, let's say, creating an activator mindset beyond an individual level,
Mhm.
what is typically the approach you take, and what are the recommendations that you make for those companies?
Yeah, I think for that, that is a big theme. So when I would say probably 80% of our clients that we work with on activator training programs, the reason they are coming to us is because they are struggling to get their partners to collaborate with each other. So like you said, they all sit in different offices, different practice groups, different sector groups, and the one group doesn't talk to another group. But leaders of the firms know the opportunity to deliver the most valuable work for our clients, the opportunity to deliver high margin work
Yeah.
that is sticky and differentiated, that's when multiple practice groups and teams come together and they're solving the most complex problems. But it's very hard to make that happen. And I think what a lot of partners and firm leaders immediately assume is that it's because we are not compensating people appropriately. So this is a function of compensation. Now, in some firms, it's like a lockstep structure where we get paid according to how long we've been there. Year one, you get paid this, year two, you get paid that, and you kind of move, everyone moves in lockstep. But most firms are kind of the eat what you kill model, which is,
Yeah.
everyone gets paid individually. You can share credit with colleagues, but most of the reward, most of the incentive structure encourages you to keep the work for yourself and not share it with others, right? Because that's how
Yeah.
you make the most money. And so a lot of firms will immediately say, well, we need to change our compensation model. And this is something I'm always wary of. I say, listen, if you tomorrow changed your compensation model so that you heavily reward team-based selling and collaboration, do you think your partners would go do that? And they say, well, maybe, maybe not. And I say, in our experience, you can't get people to do something they are not comfortable doing simply by paying them. And the research on this is very, very clear. So if you pick up Dan Pink's book, Drive, is a
Yeah.
great summary of the research around what motivates humans to perform at the highest level. And we know that professionals, these are knowledge workers, they are doing very complex work for very complex, sophisticated clients. Their behaviors and certainly behavior change is not motivated by pay. So there's something else going on. Now, just to be clear, that doesn't mean pay is unimportant. And what a very dangerous place for firm leaders to be is to tell their partners, go out there and collaborate, work together, bring the breadth of the firm's capabilities to the client, and then have a pay system that rewards individual performance only. That creates what we call the say-do gap. The firm is saying one thing, but doing something else. That is a dangerous place to be because it creates disengagement, et cetera. So in other words, you can't pay people to drive new behaviors, but you have to be mindful that if your pay doesn't reinforce and is not aligned with the behaviors you're trying to drive, it can disincentivize people. So it can create a
Yeah.
reason not to do it, right?
Yeah, it's a
Now,
kind of hygiene factor that
it's
basically.
a hygiene
Yeah.
factor. It's
Yeah.
exactly right. So yeah, it's well said, Dirk. So then what is standing in the way? So in our experience, actually, the thing that stands in the way of collaboration is actually much simpler than pay and compensation and culture and these kinds of things. It is the fear that individual partners and professionals have about talking about things that are not in their area of expertise. So think about if for a moment, if I'm an IP, intellectual property lawyer, and I'm sitting and I'm talking to my client hires me because I know a lot more about intellectual property than they do. I know about the laws and the regulations and court decisions and this kind of thing, all the case law. What if the client asks about an employment law issue or an M&A transactional issue? that is not in my area of expertise. And my stock and trade with the client, the reason the client values me is I am a deeper expert than they are on intellectual property. Now, what if I try to have a conversation on something that is not in my area of expertise? Now I worry that the client might see me in a less of a positive way, right? I might damage my credibility. So what we find with activators, though, is activators are perfectly comfortable engaging in conversations outside of their expertise, not giving advice to the client, but saying, Dirk, obviously I'm an IP lawyer. You've just raised this M&A transaction coming up, but I do know, while this is not my area of expertise, I do know that our firm has some of the leading
Yeah.
M&A lawyers in the world. And so can you tell me a little bit more about this upcoming transaction? I would like to take that back to my colleagues. And
Yeah.
my promise to you is I will find the right person and I'll set up a call for you so you can pick their brain and have a conversation about this. That again delivers a lot of value to the client, and but it requires a level of comfort going outside, maybe over the tips of your skis a little bit, right? And
Yeah.
engaging in
Yeah.
dialogue that's not your area of expertise. So that we find is the biggest barrier to collaboration is overcoming that fear with partners.
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine. Hey, my final question from my
Sure.
side. Can I and other people that know that eating radishes is good, but do not
Yeah.
experience this as enjoyable yet?
Mhm.
Ever start to like radishes? And if so, do you have any advice how we could actually start liking them?
So here's one piece of advice. I think, as I mentioned very early in the conversation, when you talk to activators, they don't really like selling either. And I think that's interesting because these are the best business developers in the entire study that we ran, much better than the other four profiles, and predicted to be even better as client buying behavior changes. Um, but what accounts for that? Well, what accounts for that is the fact that activators, again, because they're paying it forward, they're bringing value and building relationships with clients before they ask for paid work, creates a different dynamic. So for most partners, their view is, I will build a relationship with this client. I will deliver value after they pay me, after they agree to pay me and they sign an agreement, right? Activators see it the opposite. I'm going to build a relationship and deliver value first, and then it won't feel like sales because it becomes a natural evolution of the relationship. This is a very simple metaphor I would use, Dirk, but somebody said to me the other day, I said, a lawyer said, that makes a lot of sense because when I think about my wife, we are married today, but first we met in university. We dated for a while. We actually lived together for a while. We got to know each other, and then we became engaged, and then we got married. It would have been very strange if I first approached her on the street and said, "Would you marry me?" And so
Yeah.
again, you are less fearful of asking the question and getting married when you have done all the work that precedes it. And
Yeah.
I think for activators, that's a little bit how they make it feel a little bit more like eating cookies and not eating
Yeah. More
radishes, right?
comfortable. Yeah. It's a much more
More
comfortable
comfortable.
starting point.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. That's
Yeah.
right.
Hey Matt, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dirk.
First of all, I tremendously like the book, and I
Thank you.
recommended it to a number of clients. Can really recommend also all listeners view to the podcast. If you're a kind of professional sales, then I honestly think it's a must-read book. I think it is
Thank you.
really really good. Hey, we talked about a lot of different elements around the activator and the activator advantage. Are there any things that we have not discussed that you would like
Oh
to
yeah.
to
Well,
mention or
I,
highlight?
yeah, hopefully listeners, I think, will be interested in learning some more. So there's the book, we really go into a lot more detail around the
Yeah,
data and the profiles, that how we did the performance analysis. We talk a lot more about the changes in client buying behavior. And I think this is an important thing to remember is that, if we had done this study 30 years ago, I don't actually think we would have found the same thing. I think it's because the client buying environment is so different. But we go into detail about the three C's, the six habits, the three
yeah,
mindsets, and the five key pivot points. And then there's a chapter at the end for firm leaders about how do I build an activator
yeah.
firm. Now, I'll also say that, we've done a lot more research since the book came out. So for anybody who wants to learn a little bit more about that, after you've gotten through the book, go to our website, dcminsights.com, and you can download. There's some other white papers we've written, some other tools and resources you could take advantage of. And then you can also learn more about our activator training programs if you're interested in that.
No, super. Well, thank you so much for that, Matt, and
Well,
thank you
thank
so
you.
much
I appreciate
for
the
joining the
invitation, Dirk.
podcast. Yeah.
Absolutely.